onto the code now. In the previous video, I had mentioned that we shall be including a colon in the message that we shall be sending to the other machine, bringing together the file name and the base64 string. So for our condition right here, I'm simply going to check if our CMD string contains the colon. So I'm going to use the contains function of the strings package. So if string dot contains a colon, and if this condition is true, we are simply going to split this CMD string. So that will be strings dot split CMD and the colon as the separator. This should be capital S, and this method will return a variable which will contain the result, so that I'm going to call it temp. And once we have that, we can now begin the process of saving this whatever we have received into a file. Now for that, I'm going to create a separate function, and I'm going to call it save underscore file, and it is going to take two arguments. So one will be the file name, which will be a string, and the other will be the base64 string, which will be a string as well. And to verify the success of writing our file, whether or not we have been successful, I'm going to return a boolean, which is either true or false. Now within this file, there's something I would like us to do first. Now, when we receive the base64 string on the other machine, which is the machine that will be running our malware, it will be in this format, B, and within single quotes, we will have our base64 string. Now, the reason it will be like this is that before sending it from the server, it will be encoded, and that is why it will come here in a binary form. So, to get our base64 string, which is what we want, we are simply going to omit this B and this single quote at the start and the single quote at the end. So I'm going to create a temporary variable right here, and that we are going to start from the second index of our base64 string all the way to the second last character of our base64 string. So length of the base64 string minus 1. Once we have that, we can now decode it, and for that we'll need to import the base64 package. So encoding base64, and right here we're simply going to do base64 dot std encoding dot decode string temp, and this method will simply return the bytes that are represented by the base64 string. So I'm going to store that in a variable, and of course, and for this we are going to ignore the error. And once we have that, we can now save it to a file. Now for that, you're going to use the read file function of the OS package, and as you can see, so the write file function, and as you can see, it takes 3 arguments. So one is the name, the other is the file contents, which are bytes, and finally the permission. So for the name, we're going to use the file name that we received, and then the content will be simply the content, and finally the permissions, I'm going to use 0644. So that is read and write, and then just read and read for the group and other users. Now this function returns an error, which is what you are going to check for. So if an error not equal to nil, which means we actually got an error, we are going to return false, indicating that the process was not successful. Otherwise, you are going to return true. Now back to our else if statement, we are simply going to do if save file, and it takes 2 parameters as we have shown down here. One is the file name and the other is the base64 string, and the file name is the first value in our temp variable, and the base64 string is the second value in our temp variable. Now if this is true, that simply means that the process was successful. We are simply going to send back a response to the server that the file was saved successfully. So file uploaded successfully. Otherwise, we are simply going to send a response to the server that there was an error uploading file. Now that is it for file upload, and in the next one we are going to work on file upload. I'll see you there.